Welcome back, everyone. This is Jeffrey Reynolds from Reynolds Runabouts. In this episode, I'm going to show you how I put my practically new white oak keel, outer keel, back on this 1955 14-foot Wagemaker Wolverine Ply-Lap boat. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's coming up. So let's get to work. Now that the keel's been repaired, and as you saw, quite solid, I'm very happy with the repairs, I'm going to fare down this old, what might have been bedding compound, or just a lot of extra paint thrown on just before they secured the keel, outer keel. And like I did for the detail trim and then the spray rail and then the sheer rub rail, I took everything off, faired the inside of each piece and the hull of the boat to get that fairing compound off, and any look for any cracks, which I did find in both the rub rail from the sheer and then from the spray rail. I found cracks mostly on the ends, and I'll hit those with epoxy, thickened epoxy, and get those fixed off the boat. And then when I go to put them back on, they'll be stronger. And I'll clean up the outer keel as well since it's off now and get it ready for 5200 by 3M, and it'll go on, and then I'll move on to the spray rail with 5200. And I'm not sure what I want to do yet with the detail or between the varnish and the blue. I'm not sure if I want to make those permanent with 5200 or maybe something less strong, just in case something went wrong. Those little detail moldings would be easy to replicate off the boat, but not on. The outer keel and the spray rail and maybe the sheer rub rail, you could put pieces in place and not have much trouble doing that. But the detail piece in the middle of the side, that's a little different. So I'm going to do a little studying on that, make sure I'm happy with what I do before I do it. So I'm going to get back to sanding and get this thing ready for some gluing and screwing. I've finished fairing off the outer hull joint that will obviously be under the outer keel when I put it back on. In many spots, keel wasn't even, meaning one of the strakes from one side was higher than the other. So by removing the paint and what might have been some bedding compound, I was able to smooth that joint off better. So the outer keel has a concave shape to it, obviously made for that. It will fit on there better, and the adhesive 5200 that I will use will have a better connection. There was also some areas of rot, meaning that didn't have any adhesive even down in the seam. I was thinking the seam, the hull was put together in a mold and glued, and with heat, I thought it would be, seamless, but it's not. So it either separated, which I don't think it did. I think it was never sealed or filled. So I will fill that with 5200 after I put Smith's clear penetrating epoxy sealer on the whole hull. I'll let that dry, and then I'll put in this 5200 and pay it in with a spatula and putty knife to make sure it's full, and then I'll put the outer keel on to make sure it's really full until I get squeeze out, and then I'll fasten it down and I'll really get squeeze out, and I'll clean that up really nice, and then I'll be able to go ahead and fair the rest of the hull with marine filler to get it nice and smooth before I do the maybe a couple more coats of Smith's just to make sure I didn't sand away any of the good sealing properties that it had. Then I'll put on the Petit Tie Coat primer and then the Petit bottom paint. I left this, if you want to call this the forefoot or the early part of the keel, I left that proud with epoxy, so when I put in the outer keel, I'll fair that in with the outer keel so it have a nice seamless transition, because it was a little low and beat up and rotted and maybe not fully fair when it was put together and sent out in 1955. So I'll get that fixed. And otherwise, I'm really happy with how that forefoot looks. It was, again, part of the keel of the boat and then molded in, so it looks really good. So I'm going to clean up the inside of that outer keel and some of the outside that I missed, and then go ahead and put it back on. I wanted to show you something before I sanded it off. 3M 5200 is what this is. It's a permanent adhesive with a flexible attitude. And the problem with 5200 is you have to put it on a clean surface. Now that could be clean wood. The better would be to have a sealer like Smith's or epoxy so it has a clean, smooth surface to adhere to. This does not have any sort of adhesion because it's on loose paint. And probably what happened, I know there's a little bit of a depression there. I think what the last restorer did was just fire it in there with a caulk gun and probably pressed it in with a putty knife to seal the leak, which it was a good attempt. It did okay, but it's certainly not what 5200 was meant for. It's meant to be adhesion on this whole surface onto the surface of the boat, not as a filler. He probably should have used, more of a caulking of some sort, but, when he just, see, it just doesn't stick. So I'm going to get that cleaned up, and then when I put on 5200 onto the whole keel, it'll have a great, clean, sealed surface-to-surface connection with the adhesive. So in addition to, I wear 7mm gloves minimum. I've tried 5. This stuff has got enough material in it, or things that are carrying the epoxy into the wood, which then flash off and leave just the epoxy after they soften up whatever's left in the way of linguins in the wood, but also carrying epoxy into the wood. It flashes off the stink, and then it gets hard and keeps the wood strong again. I use minimum 7mm gloves, seem to work the best, and then I use a carbon filter respirator, and then I also have an exhaust fan in my shop. So I'm moving the air out, which helps the drying process, but also for you, it'll be a lot easier. I'm not saying you'll get sick, but it does make you a little nauseous if you don't have a mask on. I've only done that just when I took it off and was leaving the building. You don't want to be over this stuff without a respirator with a carbon filter on it. So, and make sure that those are not worn out. I keep track on my carbon filter bag. I keep how many hours I've used it. They have a maximum of 40, but I've already noticed at 25, 30 that I'm starting to pick up a little bit of the smell. Might be my beard. The seal isn't the most perfect, but once you get to 40, you should dispose of those carbon filters and get yourself another set, because the carbon is obviously maxed out on absorbing the bad. So you should be careful about that. I use Smith's penetrating epoxy sealer. It's a 2-part, 1 and 1. You have an A and a B. I have an A and a B cup. That's just so I can see my measurements. I usually do 4 and 4. I get 8 ounces. I find that to be a nice working volume. If you get more, you know, it's flashing a little bit in the mixing cup. But also I just find myself at a big project, 8 is about all I want to mess with. And, you know, I did 24 ounces in an hour last night. So, you know, it's a good medium. You might get sick of doing it and want to do something else outside of the barn, of course, or your shop. And so 8 ounces at a time is a good. And it's a nice cup. You know, you don't have a big bucket of stuff you're working with. I use chip brushes. They're disposable. This is the 1 inch. If you're doing like the boat I'm going to be doing, I'll probably use a 2 inch because you'll get more coverage with it. But the ones allow me to do the work without really throwing a lot of extra onto the plastic and wasting it. This stuff is over $300 a kit. So you get, you know, these 2 for $311 or something like that with shipping. So it's, you want to make sure you don't waste it. And then I just simply stir it for 2 minutes with a wooden stick. I have a dedicated Smith's stick that I know it's always got Smith's in it, so I don't want to get it into my other paints or varnishes, so I have a dedicated stick. But really, yeah, you just mix it, stir for 2 minutes into a common cup. I have a common Smith's cup that's always sticky and always will be. And then I just simply go at it. So I'm going to put my mask on and I'll put it on time lapse and you can kind of watch what's happening because I won't be very audible. I should say that I've prepared the white oak keel by sanding it and getting that grain opened up so it'll take the epoxy. There's going to be areas obviously where I have repairs that won't absorb it, but that has epoxy on it, and I put that on clear, so it went in pretty deep into the wood as it was to make the, you know, the connection better. So goal is to get it down into every crevice you can, including these screw holes. And it's great because it'll strengthen the old fastener holes. So when you go to put your bedding compound underneath, and you'll have a little squeeze out obviously, but the connections are really good because you've got a lot of great chemicals coming together. And as Steve Smith will say, some of the best connections you can make with his clear penetrating epoxy sealer is to put it on and have it a little bit tacky or at least green 6 hours, and then put your primer on and it'll chemically connect. So I try to do that as much as I can because I'm going to put all this back together with adhesives and then do some sanding with the fairing compound on the boat. Especially, I will probably go over one more time when all this stuff is on the boat to give it that extra little bit of Smith's, maybe 2-3 coats, where I might have, you know, sanded away a little bit of the protection, and then I will follow it with my primer, and that'll give me that connection that Steve Smith talks about. So there's a method to the madness, and if you follow the directions from the manufacturer, in this case Steve Smith, and then I'm going to be using Pettit brand paints and varnishes, you can make really great combinations come together and make the boat a lot better overall. The paint will stick better protected. You know, follow their advice. They do this for a living, and Steve Smith is a chemist, so he knows what he's doing. So I'm going to get at this keel now. So it's been a few minutes, and I've coated the keel and the two splash rails again. Just keep saturating it. That was 8 ounces of Smith's. A and B equals 8. And what you see, when you see this shine, that knows you finally have hit saturation. This is recently done, so looking pretty good. I'm gonna let the two spray rails and the white oak keel soak for a while. I've put as much on there as it will take. I think it will keep soaking in, so I'll end up going back for a third coat on the spray rails and at least 1 or 2 for the white oak keel. So I thought I'd move on to the hull of the boat. This is a molded plywood bottom, so I'm assuming it's got multiple layers. The strakes look solid, meaning single layer, but I don't, this is what I can see. I know below it obviously is a smooth molded plywood head, which has 5 layers. These look like they might just be single strakes. So I'm hoping for the best. I hope it soaks in really nice and it doesn't take too long, but there's a lot of volume here, as you can see. I'm gonna do one side at a time and just try to keep applying as much as I can. Probably end up getting some more. Again, it depends on how much it soaks up. There's not any deteriorated wood on this surface except down here under the rub rail, spray rail, and that probably will be the one that gets the most absorption. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Like the rub rails, the spray rails, and the keel, I'm going to mix up my batch 1 to 1. Probably do 16 ounces this time because I know I've got a lot more volume and I know it's going to go fast. So I'm going to go with a bigger batch and still using the chip brush and a mask and my ventilator fan on, glasses on, and just go at it. So enjoy the time lapse. Well, the day has finally come where I can start putting things back on the boat versus taking them off, fixing them. So today, after 2 days of the Smith CPS clear penetrating epoxy sealer has been applied to the hull and to the outer keel and the splash rails, I am ready to put them back on. The fasteners are in good enough shape that I'm going to reuse most of them. I have extras for the ones that didn't, survive, either broke off or stripped. But with slot heads, that's rare, and I was happy that I could reuse them. They are bronze, so they're appropriate to go back on. This outer keel, because it's a molded plywood, had a seam probably where the 2 planks came together in the molding process, the hot mold, that I want to make sure I fill. So I've already applied the 3M 5200. I'm using mahogany because that's what I have in the shop. You can also, I believe, get it in white and even black. I'm going to use this, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trowel that in. It's a very sticky adhesive, and I'm just going to try to push that into that seam. There'll be also 5200 on the inside of the outer keel and on the inside of the splash rails because there's a void in there. I shouldn't say a void. It's been concaved so that it fits over this convex hole joint. So I will be putting more in there. I'm also smoothing it right over the fastener holes. I know exactly, because of where the spray rail and the outer keel, those holes are still good, and I'm going to reuse them. 5200 will go down into the hull with a little bit of pushing here, and it will also get pressed in when I put the outer keel and the splash rails back on. And there could be squeeze out coming out of the fasteners. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And it's important not to get it on the head as much as possible. You want to make sure you keep those slots clean. You will be able to get it off in the future if somebody ever had to do that It's just good not to get squeeze out coming out of the fastener hole if you can avoid it. It really doesn't do any good. And the fairing compound that I'm going to be putting on is going to help seal those fastener holes. So I just put a nice bead on here. I'm not getting crazy. I'm not going to use a trowel because I really want to push it down in here. The trowel, if you were putting on maybe a plank bottom boat, the trowel would allow you to spread this around evenly because it has the teeth. But in this case, I'm trying to push it down into this seam so that I can guarantee that no water ever gets down in here, or I'm certainly going to help prevent it. Here's where our fixed, I should say fixed keel, the molded keel is. Going to connect, I'll put some there. That joint has a little bit of a gap, but not much, just enough for me to get it in there and have it fit. But I kind of want to leave it so people know that that was a part of the original construction, was to have a separate outer keel match onto the molded in keel. All right, so I've got that ready. Now I will prepare the outer keel. I'll just put I'll show you a little bit of that, the goop going in, and we'll start putting it on, and then I'll go to the spray rail. To apply the 5200 fresh out of a can, 3M Marine Adhesive 5200, I have purchased a dripless caulk gun because of all the drips that this stuff costs, and it's sticky and it's messy. You have to use acetone. Total Boat also makes a kind of an acetone-friendly cleaner as well that you can use. I find it stinks more than acetone, so I don't wear a mask around acetone if it's like low volume, like little rags, but if it gets a little larger surface, you want to make sure you put a mask on. 3M also advises a heavy mask, a vapor mask on for this. I have never noticed that to be a problem. It's just so you know, that's something that they recommend. With the 5200, once you open it, it's really not recommended that you use it again. I've been able to seal it for a day or two. It is moisture activated, so when the moisture in the air gets it could work its way down the tube. Most likely it gets down into this nozzle a bit, and I always leave the nozzle long, and I'm able to cut it off and then use it, and I've used it successfully. But again, it's not recommended, but just something you can know. What you have to do with this is a metal thing you take off the bottom, and it always breaks. So have your screwdriver or pick available, and that's how. And then you'll see the plastic and then the 5200 inside. The other end, you have to also puncture that seal. Give your pick a little. You want to give yourself enough room in there. And I always keep the 5200 kit together, I call it. I have 7mm gloves or mill gloves and a pick and lots of shop towels because it is messy. You can clean it up for a good 24 hours. You can still work with it. When you prepare the surface, you should use acetone or an alternative, but don't use alcohol. Alcohol will inhibit the curing ability of that, so don't do that. Probably be the drying of the water, things like that. So you want to make sure you put your nozzle back on. Make sure it's tight. You don't want that squeezing out around the outside. Find a bead diameter that your healthy mount comes out, but not too much. And then you're ready to go. I use the dripless brand caulk gun and turn it to what, maybe if I don't really think I need it, I'm going almost straight down. So once that's done, you've got the surface cleaned. I had already abraded it, cleaned up a little bit of the Smiths, left a little bit of when it pooled, it kind of get some high and lows, so I corrected those, made sure they were fair, checked it again on the boat, made sure it was a nice fit. I'll put the 5200 on in just a stream, and I'll take my putty knife and just make sure that I've got good thick coverage, and then when I put it on, I'll see good squeeze out, which means you've got enough in there that it's literally pushing out because you've got too much. And then I'll start systematically working my way from the repair to the transom area, stern, with my large number 10 bronze screws that came with the boat, and it'll squeeze out as you go. And as you do that, you should clean up as you go with your putty knife, being careful not to get under between the seam of the boat and the outer keel, because then you're kind of ruining what you're trying to do. You can go back with your acetone, and when you're all done, clean up with your putty knife and just gently, don't try to get that cloth too close to the seam. You want to have a nice, rounded, it's almost like a fillet. And that will give you the confidence that you've got a good seal there. And you can always go in there later when it's hard, meaning firm, with you can cut it with a utility knife if you wanted. You can sand it. So there are ways you can address that later on if you're not happy, but I'm going to go with a fillet because I want that to, be a nice connection. So here we go. You just give it like any good adhesive in a caulk gun. This stuff is thick. It won't run very much, but it will sag. So I'm just going to start shooting a bead down the middle. Then I'm going to, because I have a dripless caulk gun, I'm going to turn that off for a minute, and I'm going to just do a little check. Make sure I've got enough. I'm going to push this so you can see it. I'm just going to kind of do a check, see if I got enough. Maybe I go down the middle. Looks like I could use a little more. Remember, you do have some on there already, but this is a concave surface. So you're going to want to make sure you have enough in there. So I'm going to make sure my bead is a little bit bigger than it was, or I'll maybe move back and forth. And you can always go back and add more. Don't panic. And I'm just going to do a zigzag now. That way I can pretty sure I've got enough, side to side with it. And I'll do a check, make sure I got enough there. Again, with a dripless caulk gun, well worth investing. You're going to want that whole surface covered. You can assume it's going to come out, but be confident in your work and just do it. You're going to have squeeze out, and you're going to have product that appears to be wasted, but it's not. You're guaranteeing that you have a good adhesion. You've got lots of good surface coverage, and that's the important thing. This stuff is like 12 bucks a tube. What you're doing is so much more important, and that is putting down a good adhesive sealer. And not only is it a very strong bond, it's one of the strongest glues you can buy that still moves a little bit, and it will seal, and it will give this boat a long life. So I'm going to continue doing this. I'll put it on time lapse, and then we'll get her on the boat. So I've completed the application of the 3M5200 with a putty knife. I've gone through and made sure all my edges are covered. I've made sure I've got lots of material on here, and now I will flip it over and put it on the boat. I'll give you a little look at that. Mindful you don't get this in your hair. Try to get it as close as you can. And remember, I've got a joint up here that I need to deal with. So I'm going to slide that into position. Your hands are going to get messy. Just work with it. Slide it into position. You got a little bit of mess, but As you can see, when I push on it, I'm getting nice squeeze out, and when I do my fastening, it'll be a lot more. So I'm gonna change my gloves and do that because I don't really need to get messy now. I'm gonna just go ahead and start putting things into the outer keel. Remember, I've got the old ones from before. I want to start from the front because this is where all the action's going to be coming from. When I get this ready, I have a mark where this front bolt went through. Remember, there was a bolt that went all the way through the inner keel. And what I have to do is I have to go back, put that in place, and I have to go back under the boat and put the nut and the washer back on so that I can make sure that that's nice and secure. There's one on this end and one on the end. So it's a good idea. So this is what it looks like. You're just fastening everything back down the way you took it off. You know, I've had this keel off and on so many times. It's kind of becoming a daily thing. And I was so happy that the screws continued to stay workable. Now this one, I'll probably go back and I'll have to counterbore that one a little bit more. I would like it a little farther down so that my fairing compound has a place to sit, and right now it doesn't. So I will go back and fix that one. I think there were at least two that I remember, and I will make sure I fix that at the same time I do this. So I'll keep doing that and put it on time lapse. Here we have the squeeze out as I would liked. There were two areas that didn't squeeze out at the end here, and that could have been a contour issue with me on the new piece, or the hull might have been bad the first time, I don't know. Anyway, I went in and troweled in until it squeezed out. It's almost like putting in putty into a fastener hole. I kept troweling it in, which wasn't very much, until it was squeezed out. And on the end I did as well. That one, again, that can all be sanded out or faired with a sharp knife. Another area was near this repair. As you can see, I had to trowel a little there, and I just took it from around it. And then I put in two new, I made these fastener holes deeper. They just need to be countersunk more. This is the one with the bolt. That one has to be sucked in a little bit. I have to put a nut on that, and I'll do that in a minute. But as you can see, the repair has got good squeeze out, not only on the terminal end, but also around it. And that happened throughout the whole process, except for those few exceptions. And that's where I just went in and troweled it in. So now I'm going to clean it up so I don't have even more work when I go to fair and sand and paint. And then we'll be done with that, and I'll move on to the splash rail. I have the cleanup process completed. As you can see, I have a slight fillet that I used to, make the transition from the outer keel to the garboard plank, or the first plank or strake on the bottom of the boat. And what I did is I just put a slight bevel on a metal putty knife and just dragged that along there, cleaning up as I went. And then I went back and I cleaned the surface, meaning the boat and the side of the outer rail, to get as much as I could with the same knife, with a flat edge, and just tried to get it cleaned up. You can sand that off. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with a rag and acetone to clean it up, because I know I've got sanding to do yet. So I'm probably just going to preserve that task for that. You can clean up this material, and I think if you were maybe in an area where it would get seen a lot more, maybe an interior piece, I've done that. I used a rag, but This is going to get another sanding, so I'm not going to spend the time on it. So on to the splash rail. Well, the keel is on, and I'm happy to say after 24 hours that the 3M 5200 adhesive did exactly what it was supposed to do. It's got a little bit of a rubbery consistency to it. When I press my fingernail into it, it has successfully sealed the joint between the outer keel and the garboard plank of this molded plywood boat, and I'm going to call it a success. So that'll be it for this project. The next project I'll be working on is putting the splash rails back on. There were some issues with the splash rails, underneath both the splash rail and the hull that they were touching, connected to. So that video is exclusively going to address how I fix those problems. So thank you for tuning in. If you like the videos, please hit the subscribe button. If you're learning and enjoying them more than most, hit the like button, please. And we will see you in a couple weeks. Thank you.